I've shown these two knives on my channel far more than any other two knives in my collection, and I have yet to do a dedicated review on either of them, so we're going to change that today. What's going on, everyone? Back with another episode of Stuff and Things. Happy Sunday, and this would be marking the end of Lockdown Knife Week. However, on Friday I posted a poll over on Instagram asking you guys if you wanted me to extend Lockdown Knife Week, and it won by a landslide. So, as by popular demand, we're going to extend this for yet another week. I'm kind of glad that you guys actually leaned that way, and I'm glad that you're here watching and commenting and liking all of these videos. I really do appreciate all the support. Now, I'm glad that this is going to continue because this past week I crossed off some pretty basic knives. A lot of them are very cool and they mean something to me. They're special in some way, shape, or form. However, we really didn't get into like higher end knives. I have quite a few more blades to the back of the box here that you guys either have never seen or you may have seen, but I haven't done a dedicated video on them, and they are really cool. I'm excited to actually make videos on these knives this coming week, so I hope you guys are excited for that stuff too. That being said, let's check out the hashtag over on Instagram. Now, I can't really believe this. I'm not sure if people are using the hashtag and they have their profiles on private or what the deal is, but I really thought that I would have seen at least one post of each of these knives, and I couldn't find them throughout the hashtags. I did find some knives that were pretty similar though, so first up right here we have one from Today's Carry. He has a all black Benchmade bug out, which he swapped out the scales for some Flytanium, looks like G10 orange handle scales on there. Pretty cool modification. We saw some people earlier in the week who also didn't like the bug out scales and they changed them, so that is becoming an increasingly popular thing. And then we have this photo right here coming from McLaren Knives, and this one caught my eye not only because they have a blade in here which is similar to one we're taking a look at, but it looks like a lot of the stuff in this EDC could possibly have been inspired by me. We have the Travax Ascent all the way over on the left there. I can't tell if it's like my branded one or not. We have the Gerber Shard all the way over on the right. I love that thing. I talk about them in like every EDC update video. And then sort of in the middle there, a little bit off to the right hand side, we have a Spyderco Para 3. Now, we're not taking a look at the Para 3 today. We're not taking a look at the Benchmade Bug Out either. However, we're taking a look at two knives that I believe are sort of like the flagship knives of these two companies. Whenever I think of Benchmade or whenever I think of Spyderco, these are the two knives that really stick out to me, and these are like the ones that, at least in my head, I believe that everyone should know or have in their collection. Because of that, I'm going to sort of put them up against each other and talk about pros and cons of each. So without further ado, we're taking a look at the Benchmade Griptilian and the Spyderco Paramilitary 2. First up, we have the Benchmade Griptilian. This one is a version coming with 154 cm steel on a drop point blade with a satin finish. It has a handle length of 4.62 inches, a blade length of 3.45 inches, and an overall length of just over 8 inches. Now, the Griptilians come in a bunch of different variants. This one in particular has the polymer handles, thumb studs, a reversible pocket clip for tip-up right or left-handed carry, and it also has an axis lock, which is probably one of my favorite things about this blade. Next up, we have the Spyderco Paramilitary 2, coming with a CPM S30V clip point blade. This is a full flat grind, and it has a huge enlarged Spidey hole to flick that thing open. The Paramilitary 2 has a cutting edge of exactly 3 inches, a handle length of 4.81 inches, and an overall length of just over 8.2 inches. This one comes equipped with a pretty standard Spyderco pocket clip on the G10 scales, and this one is reversible both tip up, tip down, left and right-handed carry. Nested in the back of the blade here, you will also notice that this is a compression lock design, which for my testing has been ultra reliable and ultra tough as well. Okay, Paramilitary 2 versus Griptilian. We're gonna start with this one, I guess, and we'll just talk about the pros. How about that noise for starters? Such a solid opening. I love the axis lock on a majority of Benchmade knives, and that is one of my favorite things about this blade. Now this one in particular is no longer being offered because it is of a lesser steel. This is a 154 cm blade. They had since switched to S30V to bring it up to par with something like the Paramilitary 2 here. So I don't believe this exact version is being offered anymore. This knife is probably like 5 years old by now. However, the newer updated versions are coming in at around 100 to 110 bucks if you can still find them. So as far as this particular steel goes, 154 cm for me, an EDC blade, it's fine. It holds an edge long enough, it stays pretty sharp, and it's relatively easy to resharpen. Now the ergos on the Griptilian are another thing I will give it a point for. It's got some pretty good jimping along the back of the spine here, and then of course up on the blade. The ergos on this are just so good. Not the mini grip, but this one feels really good in my hand. They do offer this in a smaller version, and I've done a video on one in the past. At the time I liked it, however this one is just more suited to my everyday tasks. It's got a good thickness to it. It's got a little bit of like a palm swell coming out the side. There are really no hot spots with this clip here. I can really grip down on this thing even with gloves on if my hands are wet, snowy, bloody, muddy, whatever. And I feel like I have a good handle on this knife. Now to me this thing is kind of plain Jane and boring. Actually both of these knives are kind of plain Jane and boring, but I think that's what makes them good as well. The plasticky polymer handles on this, I don't love them. I like the overall shape and design of them. I think it provides plenty of grip, hence Griptilian. However, I just don't really love the feeling of the material. This axis lock is super broken in. Luckily, I have not busted any of the springs in there, but I pull that down and this thing just closes and it locks up right away. That opening, it's such a good sound. Let me do it behind the camera so you can hear it. Such a good knife. This one is not a flow-through design, so you're gonna get like lint and stuff stuck up in there. How's the centering on this? It's pretty good actually. The lockup, it's not insanely tight. I have the pivot pretty loose right now, which is why it flicks around so easily, but for EDC tasks, it's not coming loose and seems to be pretty good. So now let's move on to the Paramilitary 2. This knife in the hand feels a little bit bigger overall. You're getting a little bit longer handle, a little bit longer overall length. This is coming in at 8.01 inches, and this one is coming in at like 8.28 inches. Now the things I love about this, I also love the ergos. I love the thumb ramp on here. The jimping is great, and again, this one feels super locked into my hand. I like the front finger choil on here with the same style of jimping. The handle is a little bit bigger than the Griptilian, so I definitely have more to grab onto here. You can hold the knife in a few different positions, and all of them are good. The pocket clip on this one, pretty standard for a Spyderco knife. Again, you can put it left, right hand, tip up, tip down, however you want to carry it, and it should work for everyone. Now this blade is S30V, full flat grind, another one of the pros. I love full flat ground blades. This steel is going to be a little bit better than the old steel on the Griptilian, but again, for an EDC blade, steel doesn't bother me all that much. However, if you're comparing it to everything else out on the market nowadays, I would say that this one is still pretty much up to par with other offerings. You got that massive, huge, oversized Spidey hole, makes this thing super easy to flick out. The compression lock on the rear, you can also use that sort of in the same fashion as the axis lock here. Just kind of press it and flick the knife out with the compression lock. The lockup on this is probably still a little loose too, just like this knife here. I keep these knives a little bit looser because I play with them so much. There's a little bit of wiggle room from left to right, but it allows you to drop that thing closed very easily. You can hear this one from behind the camera. Really solid opening with this one, and I prefer the G10 handles as opposed to like the plasticky polymer on the Griptilian. Now with those comparisons being made, I also want to throw this knife into the mix because it seems like this one has sort of taken over as the flagship. This is the Spyderco Para 3. You guys have seen this on my channel a million times before. very heavily used knife in my collection, and it's like the Paramilitary 2, but just a little bit smaller in every way. Some people might think that an overall length of just over 8 inches is going to be a little bit too big for EDC. I think I would agree and say that this is much easier to carry with you every single day. However, that did not stop this one from being in my pocket quite a lot before this one ever released. Spyderco also offers them in a lightweight version like this here, so this thing is super light, sort of comparable to like a bug out compared to the Griptilian. However, this one is very similar in design, so it's still a Spyderco Para 3 lightweight now, and it's just coming in much lighter than these other two. So these, in my eyes, are sort of like the flagship knives of Spyderco. This one, in my opinion, is still like the flagship of Benchmade, although some other people would probably argue something like the 940 might be like a flagship. Either way, they're all really popular knives coming from each company. And that also made me think of some other knives like the Chris Reeves Sebenza 21. This particular variant might not be like the flagship. I would think of a regular drop point blade, plain edge, and plain titanium scales as sort of like the go-to Sebenza. However, I prefer this one a little bit more. And then when it comes to Microtech, I think of the Ultratech 85 as like the flagship of OTFs, really, for that matter. When I think of Microtech, this is the exact blade that comes to mind, and when I think of OTFs as a whole, this is again sort of setting the standard for a lot of knives out there today. So now, all of that stuff aside, coming back to these two blades here, if we could like mash them together and take a little bit from each, I think it would be a very cool knife. So starting with the blades, I think I would prefer the sort of drop point shape on the Griptilian, but I would prefer the full flat grind of the Spyderco. In this particular version, I of course would prefer the blade steel of the S30V on the Paramilitary 2 versus the 154 cm on the Griptilian. As far as opening goes, I like the thumb stud, I also like the Spidey hole, but if I only had to choose one, I think I would opt for this. There's just like more fun ways to flick it, but the action on both of them is great. And now for the handles. As far as ergonomics go, I like the way that the Griptilian feels in my hand just a little bit more. Thicker handles, although I really don't like the material. I would prefer the G10 on the Spyderco, but this thing just fills up the hand a little bit better. It's got good grip all over it, and that's the whole purpose of the Griptilian. I think I prefer the axis lock over the compression lock as well. They're both fairly similar, and Spyderco actually offers something very similar on like the Mantic series, but for this comparison, I think I would prefer the axis lock. Now again, I would prefer the materials on the Spyderco, the blade steel, also the handle material. This G10, it's pretty aggressive. It doesn't like rip up your pocket or anything, and it doesn't really look all that aggressive, but it gives you some really good grip. I also prefer a little bit longer of a handle like this on here. That way I can put my finger up in that choil and hold this knife a little bit differently than this knife right here. And then for the pocket clip, both of them are pretty good. I think this one might be bent out just a little bit. I guess the Spyderco would have the advantage here since you can flip that thing around. But for me, they're both pretty similar. If I actually had to choose, I might prefer something like the upgraded clip that I have on my Para 3 right here. This is a Casey Lynch clip. It's deep carry, so this thing falls down into your pocket a little bit lower, and I think it's a good addition to most knives. And then we have the price point. I think both of these are pretty evenly matched. This one is coming in at about $150. The Griptilian about $110 depending on what model you get. Both of these have aftermarket support for different handle materials and different blade options, different pocket clips. So like I keep saying, these to me are like the flagships. There's a lot of good qualities about each of them, and I don't really think you could go wrong with either one. So those are pretty much all of my thoughts on these two knives. I love a little bit about both of them, and each knife as its own. It's a great option for anyone looking for a pretty all-around EDC knife. Again, I can't believe it's taken me this long to actually bring you guys dedicated videos on these. There are videos all over the internet on these already. However, I did want to cross these off my list before we get into some of the other stuff in my collection throughout the rest of this upcoming week. If you have any questions on these, you can let me know in the comments down below, but it's kind of been beat to death already. There have been so many videos and there's a ton of information on the internet, so just search around and I'm sure you'll find what you're looking for. Now, I hope you guys are excited for what's to come this week. A few of these knives are sort of grail knives. They're ones that I've had on my list for a while and eventually I acquired them. So if this past week was kind of dull to you, I think that this coming week might be a little bit more interesting. Continue using that hashtag if you want to be featured in an upcoming video, and I believe that's all that I had for today. So if you're new to this channel, consider clicking subscribe. We got daily videos coming yet again for another week. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I will talk to you in the next one.